Hello, hello. It is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. And today, we are going to be talking about my favorite kind of studio monitors. Some of the most useful studio monitors you can have. And honestly, one of the most useful tools you can have in your studio, period. What if I told you you could make a purchase that costs, around $300, sometimes less, that would change the way that you mix forever for the better. And if you feel like it didn't, you could easily resell it for pretty close to what you bought it for. It'll make you hear music in a new way, and it'll make your low end better, particularly things like kick and bass. They'll translate so much better in the mix, even if you have a room that is terrible in the low end, where you can't trust bottom end. That type of monitor are the Cube monitors, originally put out by a brand called Auratone, very popular, nearly ubiquitous in high-level pro studios in the 70s and 80s, and today as well. And Auratone have reissued. I have my original Auratones here. They've reissued them, and there's 4 or 5 other models, and I've compared all of them back to back. I have 4 different sets of Cube monitors right here with me right now, and I've also compared them to 2 other sets of Cube-style monitors on the market, and I will give you a sense for, if you're going to buy these kinds of monitors, which ones might be the best for you, which ones are going to give you the most accurate results. And there's certain reasons that you might prefer some of the ones over here compared to some of the ones over there. And we're going to talk about the pros and cons of all the models that are out there. Before we get into it, I'm also going to give you my spiel for why these are so powerful, why they work, and also how to use them. Because there's a specific process for mixing on Cube-style monitors that are going to help you get better results out of them. So I really want to sell you on the idea of why you should have them, why they work, why they do what they do, which ones are going to be best for you, and how to use them. So we'll get into detail on all of that. The only thing that I've got to do before I do it is give the briefest of shout outs to our sponsors. This podcast is free to the public thanks to our sponsors. And the most important sponsor, as always, is you. How do you sponsor this podcast? With your likes, also with your love, but there's no love button. So just hit the likes, hit the subscribes, all that good stuff. And if this is useful to you, please consider hitting one of the affiliate links. I did a whole big article version of this that you can find, and I have it linked as well. And if you check out the article version, there's affiliate links in there. And I also have the affiliate links. I'll put them in a pinned comment in the description, and at no additional cost to you. They do help support the channel. Also, even if you don't buy any of these monitors, if you buy anything else in one of these places, it also helps support the channel. So definitely check that out. I also want to give a shout out and thanks to some of the other sponsors. Sponsoring again this week, one of my favorite brands is Avid Pro Tools. Why? Because I use Pro Tools literally every day. And if you go to SonicScoop.com/Pro Tools, that is SonicScoop.com/Pro Tools right now for Black Friday, you can get 40% off a Pro Tools subscription. That's like getting 4 months for free. I think this is an absolutely great way to do it. You get to stay abreast of all the constant updates to Pro Tools, and I'll be doing a live stream next week about the most recent updates in Pro Tools in the past year and how to use them. That's going to be a really fun one. Pro Tools is used by so many major mixers out there, and just like Auratones are found in all of the most super high-end studios, if you get Auratone, like these Mix Cube style monitors, you will be able to hear in your space how records will sound pretty much on that style of monitor in the fanciest studios in the whole world. And you'll be able to speak a kind of similar language and have a similar vocabulary as the biggest studios in the world that have these types of Cube-based monitors in them. And your mixes are going to translate back and forth to these high-end studios and producers and engineers everywhere who have these Mix Cubes much better if you're using the same speakers that they are. And Pro Tools is a lot like that. Pretty much all of the highest-end studios, all the producers and engineers, particularly in the US, who are doing chart-topping work are working in Pro Tools, and you can get started in Pro Tools for as low as $79 a year for the artist versions. And there's also perpetual licenses and all that stuff. So definitely check it out. I use Pro Tools all the time. A couple other quick shout outs. I also want to say that all of our courses, like Mixing Breakthroughs, are on sale right now. Go to mixingbreakthroughs.com and I will give you guys a discount code for Black Friday. So there's a Black Friday special on all of our courses. It is 25% off. Go to mixingbreakthroughs.com, masteringdemystified.com, compressionbreakthroughs.com, eqbreakthroughs.com. Check out any of our full-length courses. They have a 30-day money-back guarantee. Also, a couple more Black Friday deals I want to hip you to. Sound Toys. You can get huge discounts on upgrades to their bundles. Right now, 60% off Sound Toys 5. My goodness. Definitely check them out over at soundtoys.com. They're making some of my favorite creative mixing effects in the known universe. And one last little sponsor shout out for you. 50% off some of my favorite mics, including the mic I'm talking to right now from Jay-Z Microphones. Not only 50% off for Black Friday, but also an additional 10% off with the code Justin at checkout. So get an additional 10% stacked on top of these huge discounts with the code Justin at checkout over at jzmic.com. Okay, with all that out of the way, the stuff that you are here for, which is why these monitors, why they're great, and which ones to choose. All right. Here's my spiel. I have been using the Auratone Super Sound Cubes, the original. This is a pair. I talked to the son of the guy who designed these studio monitors, and he pegged my pair probably around 1981. Famously, Michael Jackson's Thriller album was mixed mostly on a set of Auratones, and it went on to be basically the best-selling album of all time. But it wasn't just that. So many major records that people love the sound of, like those records that people use as references for years to come. One of the most biggest cliches in the audio engineering world is that people will check out Steely Dan records to figure out how systems sound. A lot of mixing of records like that also done on these Auratone Super Sound Cubes. So why these small monitors, and why at just a few $100 for a monitor, why they can outperform monitors that cost thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars? A few reasons. Reason number one, I want you to always understand about studio monitors and studio monitor selection is your mixes will tend to sound like the inverse of your speakers. Meaning, if you have speakers that sound really big, really impressive, lots of bottom, lots of top, like almost like hyped up, scooped out, huge sounding monitors, your mixes will tend to sound like the inverse of that. The more that your monitors amp up lows and amp up highs, the more that your records and your mixes are going to sound relatively mid-rangey and kind of small. Meanwhile, if you mix on a set of one-way speakers like these that are relatively mid-rangey and often relatively band-limited, your mixes will tend to sound bigger with more hyped up lows, more hyped up highs. They'll encourage you to do the carving out in the kind of cluttery, boxy mid-range and low mid-range areas that you might otherwise not do. By mixing on speakers that can sound a little boxy, a little mid-rangey, you're encouraged to make your mixes sound less boxy and less mid-rangey. And one of the biggest problems with beginning and intermediate mixers is mixers who are not carving out enough in the low mids and allowing the mid-range to get cluttered. When you're forced to fit everything together between like 300 hertz and 3000 hertz, and you get that part of the record right, the heart and soul, the mid-range of the record right, then the whole record will work no matter where you take it. But if you get that wrong, it does not matter how big and boomy and how shiny and glossy your bottom and your top are. None of that will help if the mid-range, the heart and soul of the record, the essential balances of what's most important in the mix, secondary, etc., if that stuff doesn't work and there isn't space for everything in the mid-range, it won't translate across systems and it won't even sound good on big systems. So that's one of the biggest things to recognize. The second big thing to recognize is if you are in an untreated room, or even if you have modest acoustic treatment, chances are the low end in your room kind of sucks. Maybe that's not an appropriate term to use, kind of blows. Anyway, you have bad low end in your room, and chances are that everything below 200 hertz in your space is lying to you, unless you have done substantial treatment in your room. Studio monitors like these potentially take out most of what's happening below 200 or 300 hertz. And you won't be misled by the wild swings and discrepancies that you'll feel in the low frequencies in your space. So that's another big reason. And then a third reason here is, I've got to say, the transient response on these. you can get, with a one-way single driver speaker, no tweeter, just a really good, really fast, relatively distortion-free mid-range driver that actually moves quickly and gives you information about the transients in your record. Because if you spend $300 to maybe $700 for a pair of powered cube-style monitors, you are going to get one speaker that is really good at moving back and forth quickly in the frequency range where it operates. A speaker that can accelerate and decelerate quickly means that it can travel a further distance in the same amount of time, being better able to reproduce transients. And generally speaking, these kinds of monitors are going to give you a clearer picture to just how much attack you have on things like snares, just how much crack there is on elements, how punchy elements are or aren't. And some of that, when you spend $300 to $700 on a conventional big set of studio monitors, those transients can get a little bit more smeared and veiled. And you may have trouble hearing things like the attack times on compressors because not just because you haven't learned to hear it, that's part of it, but also because your speakers and maybe your headphones don't really reveal them because they're not fast enough. The transients aren't clean enough. And getting a set of speakers like these can be hugely beneficial in that area. Who are the kinds of people who should get these studio monitors? Particularly people in small and untreated rooms, and particularly people who only have a single two-way set of monitors. That is a conventional set of studio monitors that has a low-frequency driver and a tweeter, but no mid-range driver. These will give you so much better insights into what's happening in the mid-range. And often the transients on them can be better than a lot of dynamic headphones. And unlike mixing on headphones, they sound like mixing on speakers. Now, how can you get into a set of speakers like these? Potentially as cheap as, I think the cheapest options we'll look at are about $200, and the most expensive options we'll look at are about $750. And I'll kind of start rank ordering them for you right here, right now. Okay, so let me give you my tasting notes and the options here. The very first option to look at are the original Auratone 5C Super Sound Cubes. And I got one of those right here. Here we go. Here is one of my two original Auratones. Let's see what the serial number on this guy is. I forgot where it's written. 0040857. When I talked to the guy whose father designed these speakers and is now reissuing them, he told me that I think these were both around 1981, I believe my two monitors were. And I have two of these Auratones. The other one's over my other shoulder. I love them so much. And when I started mixing on them, I learned so much more about mixing better. And I'm going to tell you at the end of this episode how to mix on these speakers, what the best order of operations is, and the best way to think about how your mix should sound when you're using these. And we'll talk about that very shortly once I get over my tasting notes for all the major types of Auratones and cube-style monitors available. So the benefits to these. One, they're actually not that expensive. Even though these haven't been made for like 30 years, maybe 40 years, they're actually not that crazy expensive. Because there's so many reissues now that the prices on these have actually come down relative to where they would otherwise be. Because now people don't have to go clamoring to the used market to buy them. There's so many new options that you can actually get a used one. You can get a single used speaker for around $200, $250. I'm still seeing single ones potentially available. And I'm seeing pairs of them in good condition, original pairs in good shape for $600. Now, with that said, when I'm talking about these prices today, first of all, we're in a period of heavy inflation. Anyone seen the price of gold lately? My goodness. So I can't promise that the prices I'm saying today will be true in 5 years. So we might have to do an updated version then. So that's caveat number one. And caveat number two is that you need to buy a power amp. These are passive speakers. So when I say as little as $200, $250, $300 for a single, maybe $600 for a good pair of them, that is without a amp to actually power them. To get an amp to power these guys, you're probably spending a minimum of another couple $100. Maybe you can get away with something around, I don't know, $150 to $250. So that does increase the price when you're thinking about buying an amp separately. Now that said, you may already have an amp sitting around that you're not using as collecting dust or is serving some other purpose, in which case there's no additional cost for an amp. And there may be even cheaper amps available in the $100 and less price range that maybe aren't as pro audio, but could potentially power something like this. The benefits of these are, if you're already used to them, some of the reissues are really, really, really close. but there's still something about these originals that are slightly different sounding than even the best reissues. I found these to have kind of to me, they seem to have the fastest transient of any of them. And I think some of that has to do with the lack of rigidity here. If you actually touch this driver, like it moves so easily, it's so incredibly light. There's just ever so slightly more attack and transient out of this than even the best reissues. But that is so slight and it's so splitting hairs, and any of the other ones are really good. So almost the only reason to get these, oh my goodness, I almost dropped my prized vintage Auratone. Almost the only reason to get these is because you want to have a vintage pair, because you're used to the vintage pairs and you accept no substitutes. But I got to tell you, some really famous guys who are great mixers who spent their whole careers mixing on these, when they wanted to outfit new studios, said, just give me the new ones. Because some of the benefits of the new ones is they're matched so much better together. I told you I have two vintage Auratones. Well, they're not both from the same year, and even though they're fairly close serial numbers, they sound kind of a little bit different from each other in frequency response, and I prefer the sound of one of them slightly over the other, and that's not always what you want out of a stereo pair. If you're just buying a single, that's not an issue, but matching between monitors is not great on the used market, especially if you're not buying pairs that were originally matched in like consecutive serial numbers. But even then, one of the speakers might have had a driver blown out and had a driver replaced, and now it has a different frequency response than the other, even if they're very close serial numbers. So there are some potential problems with quality control, or just, I would say, the difference from one to another. Also, they got these old style pegs that you put the speaker wire into, and they're just harder to deal with than modern terminals for hooking up power amps to speakers. So that is option number one. And it's still a good option. And it's still kind of my favorite because I learned on these and I love them, and not everyone has the originals, but you don't need to be a nerd like that. To tell you the truth, if I had never used Auratone monitors before and I wanted to get them today, probably the top thing on my list might be the reissues of the Auratones. Here they are. These are an absolutely beautifully made reissue. They're made by the son of the guy who originally designed these speakers. The Auratone 5C Super Sound Cube, it even has like the original logo, which I absolutely love. Much better modern quality terminals. Honestly, even better material that the box is made out of. And arguably, there are ways in which the drivers are better. They are a bit more rigid. These, of all the SoundCube style monitors I've tried, sound the closest, bar none, hands down, to the original Auratones. There's just, I thought there was this tiniest difference in speed of transient, but almost to the point where I wonder if I'm imagining it, and I'm wondering it's just because I can see the driver move even more on the old ones. Is my vision, my sighted listening changing my opinion on this? I don't know. They're really close. I think I hear the tiniest bit more attack in the old ones, but these are so close that if you were blindfolding me, I don't know if I'd be able to tell the difference, although I would like to try. These are wonderful, and they can be had as cheap as $200 for a single passive monitor, and as high as $750 for a pair of powered monitors. That's with an amp built in. The version I have here is a passive pair, but with Auratone's own power amp that's made in conjunction with Better Maker. So it came with a power amp, and then you run out speaker wires to the speakers, and this costs $700 for the pair, the two speakers with the power amp. Now, you might be saying to me, Justin, $700 for a pair of studio monitors, that is pretty close to the price of getting just like a really nice set of big two-way monitors, and you want me to get these frequency-limited speakers? You're crazy. This doesn't seem like a good value. I'll tell you that honestly, you'll probably get better mixes on this set of frequency limited $700 set of really tiny monitors that don't do extreme highs and don't do extreme lows than on most $700 sets of speakers. With that said, you won't be able to hear what's going on in the lows, and you will need to either supplement with headphones that reproduce low frequencies really well, or you will need to really trust your mastering engineer, and you will probably also want to look at frequency analyzers to a degree to make sure that you don't have like wildly excessive subs going on your record. So these kinds of speakers probably most suitable for people who have nice two-way monitors in nice studios, and they want a really nice one-way single speaker cube to keep up with them. Can't recommend these enough for people who have them in budget. We can look at them here real quick and see all the different versions here. Here you see 750 for powered ones, 700 for, and they also come in with the amp. They also come in a bunch of colors. They've just come out with a white color, which is pretty cool. They've recently come out with this limited edition red color. And right now, another Black Friday special, at least here on Sweetwater, $50 off while supplies last on a single red one. This is a powered one. So for $350, a single powered one, and then a single passive one, I think, can be as low as $200. Let's see if we can find one here. Yep, there we go. There's a passive one, single, where you supply your own power amp for $200. Then it'd be $350 with the amp built in, $600 for two passive ones with an amp, or $750 for two with the amps built in. All right, now on to our next picks, which are, I think, the winner for best value. These are the Avantone Mix Cubes. And I don't have them right here with me. I've tried these many times. I've heard them in so many studios. These, I wouldn't be surprised if they sell even more of these than the Auratone reissues, because they are an even better value and even lower price. But I got to tell you, they do not feel low quality in any way, shape, or form. If you actually pick up a set of these monitors, the finish on them is beautiful. The heatsink on them is gorgeous. Like, holding this in your hands, it really feels like a well-built, well-made piece of machinery. It is a tremendous value. Nothing about these feel, look, or sound cheap. They're astonishingly good quality, but they are less expensive. So what's the catch? Why not just buy these? Well, I will say that they sound ever so slightly different than the original Auratones and then the reissued Auratones. These are the most accurate and the most band limited, the original Auratones. In a way, they're the worst from the frequency response perspective. If we're talking about the original Auratones and the Auratone reissues. But that's part of the charm and beauty of them, is that they eliminate a lot of lows, a lot of highs, and really push the mid-range forward and say to you, get the mid-range right, because that's what matters in your record. The Avantones go the tiniest bit deeper and the tiniest bit higher, and they have ever so slightly this little bit of a scooping out in the mid-range that takes away some of the warts and all beauty of the Auratones. The Auratones are completely unflattering and extremely revealing and make you work really hard to get mixes that translate extremely well. The Avantones do that as well, but they have a little bit more lows, a little bit more highs, a tiny bit more scooping in the middle, a slightly more plasticky sound. I don't want to use that because it sounds demeaning to them. They shouldn't be demeaned. They're great. And if you want to save some money, and if spending $200 for a passive single all the way up to $750 for a active pair sounds like too much for you, and you want to save a little bit of money, these are a great value, and they really do the job very well. And if you learn to mix on these, I don't think you're going to be disappointed at all. If you look at the prices on these guys, you can get a single one for $250, but that will be a single active speaker with the amplifier built in. So you don't need a separate amplifier. And in addition to that, you can get a pair of them for $500. They also come in cool finishes. The cream finish is probably the most popular. It's beautiful. And they've recently put out a red one. These are great. One of the other benefits too to having the power amplifier built into the speaker is that they're a little bit less noisy, or it's a little easier to keep them noise-free. When you're using a power amp and then running speaker cable out to the back of the speaker, and if you start crossing over things like power cables and the like, it is a little bit easier, I think, to pick up noise along the way when you have the power amplifier mounted outside of the speaker rather than inside of it. That said, one of the benefits of not having the amplifier built in is there's always going to be compromises in cabinet design when you're trying to stuff an amplifier into it. And maybe there are some ways in which the acoustic performance of one of these guys is, without the amplifier in it, may be slightly superior, but that is not something I've done extensive listening tests on. I'd really have to check the Auratone with the separate amp versus the Auratone with the amp inside of it, and hear if they sound substantially different to me. I could imagine there being a theoretical reason that having the amp outside of it would make it maybe perform slightly better acoustically, but maybe have a slightly larger chance of picking up additional noise on the way. So there are the pros and cons. Okay, on to our next one. Now, the next two types of monitors we're going to look at are in a way the same and in a way totally different. The next ones we're looking at here are the Reftones. And these Reftones take a totally different approach than the original Auratones. They're still a single driver design. They still have really fast, accurate transients, but instead of trying to be really frequency limited, they get rid of all the lows and all the highs. No, they have high frequency extension and low frequency extension much further than you'd expect a single driver to have. I believe these guys will reproduce frequencies down to about 80 hertz. So the Reftones are the Reftone company trying to make a speaker that is cube style, but could be a main monitor that is actually telling you accurate truth about what's happening in the lows, and that goes substantially higher than the originals. They also thought that these would be great speakers as like a travel set of monitors. This could be a full range monitor that goes from about 80 hertz to above 10K that you could take from place to place really easily. And you can find custom-made hard cases for these. They used to sell them directly for about $100. Now I think there's other companies that make hard and soft cases for them, potentially slightly less than that on the used market, and the soft ones might be a little bit less. But the idea is if you're doing remote recording rigs or remote mixing rigs, or you're setting up in different places, rather than just using headphones, you want to have a set of full-range studio monitors with you or something close to it. Bring these. They take the room out of the equation enough because they're not really reproducing below 80 hertz. So they're still chopping off some of the lowest frequencies that can be most mangled by most rooms. And they're a portable set of speakers that you can rely on and you can trust in a variety of places. Or they can serve the purpose that Auratones serve in your studio, but a more modern take on them that go deeper and help you make potentially better decisions around genres like hip hop and EDM, where you want to understand even more what's going on in the lows. That is the selling point for the Reftones. These guys come, I think these days, in a couple of options, powered and unpowered originally, but now, let's look them up. The Reftones, whoops, I have to fix that link in the article, are now going for $400 for a powered monitor, a single one, or $400 for a pair of non-powered monitors where you supply the amp. Also, for $600, you can get a pair of powered ones that are also Bluetooth enabled, which is kind of cool. So you can wirelessly connect to them. So the price is kind of in the middle, where the Avantones are $500 for a pair, kind of frequency limited. The Auratones are also frequency limited. They're about $700 to $750 for a pair, powered. And these guys at $600 a pair for the powered versions, the Reftones, are right smack dab in the middle, but they have way more low frequency extension and way more high frequency extension than either, while still offering the benefits of having a single driver, particularly in things like transient response, lack of crossover, phase coherence, lack of phasing, issues between the low driver and the high driver. All of those benefits are still there. All right. Then there's one more studio monitor that is kind of the best of both worlds, and it is fast becoming one of the most interesting designs in this market. They're not available in as many places. Our affiliate links right now for Sweetwater, B&H, Amazon, none of those are going to work. You can find them right now at Alto Music. I don't have affiliate links for Alto Music, but they are great, and I wish Amazon that Alto did affiliate stuff, and I wish that Tantrum did, because honestly, these are a really cool design, and I want to be encouraged to push them even more. What these Reftones do is that they added the low frequency and high frequency extension. What the Tantrum Audio Angry Boxes do is they now have two modes. So in the flat mode, they're kind of like the Reftones, where they have greater low frequency extension, more high frequency extension. But you can also put them into the frequency limited mode that rolls off the tops and the bottoms. So it's kind of a chameleon. It can do what the Reftone does, and it can do what the original Auratones do. And it does that at a price of $350 for a single or $750 for the two of them. This, in a way, even though it's one of the most expensive options that we've looked at, equally expensive to the Auratones, you could say it's one of the best values because it's like having two sets of monitors. You have a bandwidth limited version that is almost as good as the Auratones. Although I give a slight edge to the Auratones when you put this in its frequency limited setting. And then you have a full range mode that's pretty much as good as the Reftone, though slightly different. I'll talk about how in just a second. So it's almost like you spend $750 for a pair once or $350 for the single, and you get both types, the Reftone and the Auratone. So that, tremendous value. But wait, that's not all. There's one more thing. It also comes with this awesome carrying case. And I've got to tell you, this thing shipped to me from England, and the box was a mess. I don't know what they did. First of all, the thing was stuck in like Kentucky for something like 8 weeks. They shipped it to me from England 2-3 months ago, and it might have been stuck there for almost 3 months in transit because of like tariffs and this garbage. So super annoying, tariffs and customs. I've never had these issues getting things shipped in the past, but now it's super annoying to get things shipped, especially from small companies from overseas. Just garbage annoying. But even though the box was practically trashed from, I don't know how much it was handled over the past 3 months, like I got these updates, it was being scanned every day and would still never come to me. This case protected them. And they came in perfectly good shape, even though the outside box was like destroyed. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to write to these guys and say, you have to send me another pair. I'm gonna have to wait another 3 months to try them. But this is a remarkably well made soft case, no additional cost, comes with them for $750. Really ingenious ways of separating the drivers from each other so the drivers don't get damaged. So if you want a set of studio monitors to carry around, just the addition of this super awesome carrying case and the accessories that are in it, man, this is great. Other companies take note. With the Reftones, there were custom carrying cases available. Reftone used to sell them. They stopped selling them. You could get a hard case back in the day for like $100. This one's included, and it's like a better, more convenient case and lighter weight. Speaking of lighter weight, these are, you can see, the smallest and the lightest of any of the powered studio monitors that we've looked at. So you can see it's remarkably smaller than either of the original Auratones, and even it's about the same size as the Reftone passive, but this one's active. So I'd imagine the Reftone active, if I had it here to compare, would be slightly larger still. So this one's great. Awesome value, 2 different modes, and the finish is kind of cool. It's got this weird kind of like stucco finish on it that's has almost like this kind of graffiti vibe about it. Beautiful color, comes in red, comes in black, has this cool light that goes on, and it's the only one of these that I know that has DSP built into it to help with the EQ and making the EQ even more linear in this guy. So absolutely great speaker. So what are the drawbacks? Well, there's 2. One, when it's in its full bandwidth mode, it is a little prettier sounding than the Reftone, which leads me to believe it is maybe ever so slightly less accurate than the Reftone. Like there's just this tiny little bit of additional sparkle in the top and this tiny bit of additional kind of lift and extension in the lows. Just listening to it for pleasure in the full range mode, I enjoy the sound of this more than the Reftone. But I'm pretty sure the Reftone is probably, if you were to measure them, maybe a little bit flatter. So there's pros and cons to that. The pro being this is nicer to listen on. The potential con being it does a little bit less of what an Auratone is supposed to do and kind of not amp up lows or highs or anything. The other thing is when you put it in this more band limited mode, I thought that the transients were ever so slightly faster in the original Auratones and the reissues. And I found this one to be ever so slightly brighter. Really tiny stuff, though. To me, it felt like I was hearing additional crack on the snare in the original Auratones from the mid-range being forward and fast. And here I felt like I was hearing crack in the snare from it being ever so slightly brighter, maybe in the upper mids or the low highs. But honestly, all of these complaints and caveats are so teeny tiny and so nerdy and nose pickery and like wine swilling that you could just throw a dart at these 4 speakers, and whichever one the dart hit, if you picked it, and then I imagine replace the cone because it would have a dart pierced through it, so you'd probably need to replace the driver. But once you replace the driver that has a dart sticking out of it, any of these speakers could be totally awesome, and you could learn to mix on them great, and they would be rad. So basically, get one of these. If you just want to get a single one, and you have a power amp at home, the cheapest way to actually get into that is going to be for a couple $100, just buy a single Auratone for $200 if you already have an amp. If you don't have an amp, just buy a single Avantone. That would be $250 for the powered one. Or if you want the additional features, $350 for a single powered Tantrum Audio Angry Box. Or I believe you have the option on the Reftones of, I've got to double check their price. A single powered one is $400. So they're the most expensive one for a single powered one, the Reftones. A little bit cheaper on the Tantrum. And for the cheapest one for a single powered would be the Avantone, followed by going with a non-powered Auratone. If you want to get a pair of them, you can look at if we're talking active pairs, it would be $500 for the Avantones. It would be $600 for the Reftones, and it would be $700 or $750 for the Auratones, and $750 for these Tantrum Audios. The one last thing I can mention, there was a speaker available that was really inexpensive, the Behrintone C5A and the C50A. These were only like $100 for a single speaker, and you can still find them on the used market. So if you want to try this idea, and you want to be really, really inexpensive about it, you can try these Behringer guys, and you may be able to find them on Reverb. Here, I'll look it up. Let's see what's on there right now. Wow, these were $100 back in the day. Here's one for $130. It looks like someone's selling one of these still in the box. Another one has a mint single Behrintone for $220. I wouldn't buy it for that price. And here's a Behringer pair for $500. Nah. When these were selling new for like $100 and they were cheaper than any of the others, I think that there was a case to be made for them, just that they were cheap. But to me, they're the least good sounding of them. They're kind of band limited. They're a little bit like the Avantones, but a little bit more scooped in the middle, and they have a little bit more of that plasticky, hollowy, scooped out in the middle sound inside of a frequency limited speaker. They weren't my favorite. But if you had $100 to spend and that was all you want to invest to get started, I think they could still be a useful addition to the studio. And it looks like you can occasionally find that. Here's a single one for $140, but these aren't made anymore. And that's it. Those are all of the types of cube monitors that have ever been made. I have been talking about them for entirely too long. We've been going on about 38 minutes. I promised that I was going to tell you how to mix on these and just a couple of tips on how to get the best results of these, the order of operation, and what things should sound like in them. We're going to get to that. I'll do a couple of shout outs, and then I'll give you the last bit of notes on tips and tricks for actually mixing on these. I want to give a shout out to our sponsors. The most important sponsor, as always, is you. How do you sponsor this podcast? Check out some of our great full-length courses right now. If you use coupon code BF25 at checkout, that's coupon code BF25 at checkout, you will get 25% off any of these courses for Black Friday. A couple more Black Friday things I want you to know about. I have a new link here for Avid. I should actually change this link because I believe that now we've changed this link to sonicscoop.com/pro tools, and use this link. And right now it is like 40% off for Black Friday to get Pro Tools, which is the DAW that I use every single day. I absolutely love it. They're constantly making upgrades. The software is better now than when I first started using it. It can be as cheap as $80 a year. And if you use this code at checkout, this link, go to sonicscoop.com/Pro Tools. At sonicscoop.com/Pro Tools, you'll see the 40% off there. It's like getting 4 months for free. And this is the software program that so many of the top studios are using. Auratones are going to help you translate your mix between your studio and other studios out there that use these same monitors. And Pro Tools, getting on it, will also help you even better integrate with collaborating with super high-end studios, because so many of the biggest records and the biggest studios today are still using Pro Tools. This is doubly so here in the United States, but around the world, it is really the DAW for high-end mixing record production at the highest levels in the industry. Are there other great DAWs too? Yes. Is Pro Tools the one that I use, and for a reason? Also, yes. Check it out if you haven't already, and go over to sonicscoop.com/Pro Tools. Also, 50% off right now, Black Friday sale on Jay-Z microphones, including this lovely Jay-Z Amethyst that I'm talking to right now. These are 50% off, and you can get an additional 10% off by entering code Justin at checkout. So absolutely check that out. Also, Sound Toys, making some of my favorite creative mixing effects in the known universe. Try out anything they make for free for 30 days over at soundtoys.com. And right now, can you believe it? Black Friday deal, 60% off Sound Toys 5 bundle. This is stupid. Just go get it. You're going to use this stuff every day. They have been having their plugins used in major records that you've loved for the past, oh my goodness, more than 20 years now. And they still come out with new stuff regularly, including the Space Blender, their newest plugin, which is a super crazy space age reverb. Absolutely love it. All right. And now, what I promised you. How to actually mix on Auratones. The person who I've heard explain this better than anyone, and is articulated in a way better than I've ever articulated in the past, is Dana Nielsen. Dana Nielsen recently did a MixCon Masterclass where he talks about his approach to mixing, and the way he recommends working on these is you set the levels for your bass and kick on the Auratones. You listen just on them and make sure that using just the fader, forget about EQ right now, using just the fader, you get your kick and bass levels right, where you can hear an appropriate amount of kick and bass on your Mix Cube speakers. And this goes doubly so when we're talking about the more frequency limited ones, like the Auratones, like the Avantones, and like the Tantrum Audios if you put them into their frequency limited mode. Because they start rolling off, honestly, below 1K, and they roll off really substantially below like 300 hertz, and then they're really, really rolled off below 100 hertz. If you can get your bass and your kick audible on these speakers, you've got them at the right level. But then you're going to have a problem. You're going to switch to your main monitors, and they will sound way too loud. There will be an ungodly amount of kick and bass in the low end on your full range speakers. And you're going to say, wow, these little monitors were lying to me. It told me I finally got the right level of kick and bass where I could just hear it. And now I flip to the big speakers and there's like an insane amount of low frequency. How is this going to work? Well, here's step 2. Step number 2 is reduce the low frequency on your kick and bass until there's not too much low frequency anymore. And that is a simple 2-step process for getting your kick and bass right using Auratones. Let me repeat this. Simple 2-step process for making bass and kick translate everywhere. Number 1, using nothing but your fader, get your kick and your bass when you're listening on these frequency limited Auratones or Mix Cubes of another brand. Get those kick and bass items to an appropriate level where it's like, yeah, I can really hear the kick and bass even on small speakers. Now, when you switch to your big speakers, you know that the level of kick and bass is right and that it'll speak on small systems and people are going to hear it on their phones, on their laptops. Great. But when you fold up to your big speakers, what almost inevitably happens, you'd be like, this can't be right. There's way too much low frequency in my kick and bass. I have to turn my kick and bass down. But no, stop. Don't turn your kick and bass down. You just confirmed that you have the right level of kick and bass to translate on small speakers. The problem is not that your kick and bass are too loud. The problem is that there's too much low end on your kick and bass. Mind blown. So step number 2 is reduce low end on your kick and bass until it doesn't feel like you have an overwhelming amount of kick and bass and an overwhelming amount of low end on your kick and bass anymore. This is a complete reframing of how to mix low end. It's the biggest mistake that most beginning and intermediate mixers make when it comes to mixing low end is that they don't have nearly enough kick and bass in their records, so you cannot hear their kick and bass on small systems. But they have way too much low frequency on their record. So now when it goes to mastering, to make it fit with other records, the mastering engineer's got to turn down the lows even more, and now your kick and bass disappears even more, and it disappears even more in big systems. So this is so counterintuitive, but you've got to internalize it. The way to get tighter, better kick and bass that sounds bigger, fatter, fuller is to take more low frequency out of your kick and bass and put more mid-range into your kick and bass. When you start thinking this way and start making your kick and bass heard on things like Auratones, you will start doing the correct things, like boosting mid-range on your bass, finding a place to boost in rock music somewhere between 800 hertz and 1800 hertz on your bass guitars. Maybe in more kind of like funk-oriented music, you might be boosting a little lower that, between 500 and 1500 hertz on your bass. Maybe if it's a more fusiony, more modern thing, maybe you're boosting somewhere between 2K or a little bit higher on your bass. But you're going to find those areas to boost so that they speak on a variety of systems. You're going to start listening to your kick and saying, I don't need all this 60 hertz. And I don't need all this 80 hertz and 100 hertz on my bass. On my kick, I need more 2K or 3K or 4K so people will actually hear it. 2-step process. Get on the small speakers. Turn up your kick and bass till you can hear them. Now fold up to the big speakers. Turn down the low end until you don't have an overwhelming amount of low end anymore. Try it out. Get a set of speakers like these. Use one of our affiliate links. And your mixes will change forever for the better. The only other thing I know that can change your mixing as much is to check out one of our great full-length courses like Mixing Breakthroughs, Mastering Demystified, Compression Breakthroughs, EQ Breakthroughs. Thanks for hanging out with me. It's been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. See you next time.